Thank you so much, Colonel Towner, for being here with us today on the Homeless Left.
Thank you for the invite.
So, Operation GLADIO, could you tell us first how you got involved with going down that rabbit hole and how you discovered it, how long you've been working on this, and just kind of give our audience a little brief background, just kind of so we can get started on this conversation.
So I've been researching this specific topic for about 2 years. I've read about 87 different books on just this topic. I spent 30 years in the Air Force, and I have 6 different degrees from all kinds of different perspectives. I worked on airplanes. I have my A&P license. So I've done a whole plethora of things in my life. I have a degree in construction management. We currently have rental properties. And so again, all over, I only have ever read nonfiction. I'm an avid reader. I have over 600 books in my library, and all of them have dealt with history. And so I felt like I was fairly well read in history. And so I was reading a book from Anthony Sutton. Actually, it's a trilogy. It talks about, I have an MBA, so I've been always very interested in economics and business and that type of thing. And so I was reading this book because it talks about, the 3 series of books talks about Wall Street and basically London, how they funded the Bolshevik Revolution. And I was like, well, that's not any history I've ever read. And his next book was funding FDR's ascent to power. And the next book was the same people all funding Hitler. And my mind was just blown away by that. I'm like, well, why the hell would they create the left and the right? That makes no sense. And until you kind of step back like to the 30, 40,000, it's the perfect scenario, because there's a guy by the name of Joseph Farrell that wrote a book called The Third Way. And what you quickly realize is this same, I call it the international syndicate, because as soon as you start going down this exploration, you're going to get, and we've lived through it all, you're going to get oh, it's not those people, it's those people. Oh, it's not those people, it's those people. Oh, it's not those people, it's these people over here. And I quickly realized that all has to be neutralized. If we're ever going to get to step 2, you can't argue about who did it. You actually need to understand what they did. Then we can go back and look at who did it. So Joseph Farrell's book was that this same international syndicate, and they're all in it, all religions, all ethnicities, everybody's in the international syndicate, but us. And they decided that they were going to create a paradoxical left and right so that they could use them to squeeze us into a cattle chute and onto the cattle train to enslavement forever. And that enslavement is called the one world government. Now, if you go back to the 1800s, these people were very open about doing this. The people in the Fabian Society in Britain, very open about it. The Cecil Rhodes, he left his entire fortune, the Rhodes Scholar Program, all of that indoctrination garbage, all set up to do this. Oxford, MI6, MI5, everything. Oh, and by the way, they're the same people that funded, I love the name of your show, they're the same people that created and funded Zionism.
Right, right.
So it all starts to make sense when you realize that all of this stuff has been carefully constructed. And I say every day that we live in a hologram. Our entire world has been constructed to be a view of something that does not exist, to include our freedom in the United States. We don't have any freedom. You have to have a license to paint somebody's fingernails. I mean, if you look at the ridiculousness of our quote unquote freedom, it's crazy. But you're never supposed to actually look, because they keep you entertained every day with football, the movies, taking your kids to soccer. You're never supposed to look at anything critically.
Yes.
So I read Joseph Farrell's book, and it was very interesting that he talked about a thing called the Madrid Circular, which basically talks about creating, after World War II, the Third World War, which we called the Cold War. Now we call it the War on Terror. And in order to be able to create this third war, because the people back in the Fabian Society time said, we're going to have three world wars. And by the time the third one is done, we will all be enslaved and they'll be in charge. They forecasted this back in the late 1800s, by the way. They were all eugenicists and crazy, crazy people. The Margaret Sanger crowd of Planned Parenthood, putting abortions in minority. I love the clip that you played, because all of these new ideas were percolated with minorities, either in Africa. So their idea was to set up the world in Pan America, Pan Europe, Pan Asia, blah, blah, blah. Well, there wasn't any Pan Africa. Well, why is that? Because Africa was going to be the slave colony for everybody. And they've used racism as one of the vehicles to keep us separated. It is so obviously living with someone as focused on this research as I have been, my husband, who sits on kind of the peripheral and listens to me talk to people about these things, came up one day and he goes, do you remember that show that we used to watch when we were kids called Get Smart? And I'm like, I'm busy. What are we talking about comedies for? Yeah, I remember that show. And he says, but do you remember what the two entities were called? And I'm like, no, I'm busy. And he goes, they were called chaos and control. And I looked at him and I went, what the hell? Are you shit? Oh my God, they were.
So that's the other part about Hollywood. So you bring up the show, they tell you right to your face, right on the screen, right?
So the good guys, the bad guys were called chaos.
Yeah.
The good guys were called control. Yeah. So we're going to create chaos to control you, and your job is to get smart.
You know,
and I was like, and my husband does this to me all the time, by the way. And I was literally blown away, because I don't watch movies, and a lot of people go, oh, that's what this movie was all about. And I'm like, okay, I believe you, but I don't watch them. So, because the real world is way more crazier than anything that you could put in a movie. So then at the end of Joseph Farrell's book, he was talking about a thing called a stay behind unit. And again, I'm fairly aware. I have a master's degree from Air War College in nothing but military operations historically, from like Genghis Khan, right? So I'm like, what the hell stay behind units, and why don't I know about them? And so you just do a search. I don't use Google, but you just do a search on the internet, and stay behind units comes up. And right next to stay behind units is Operation Gladio. And I'm like, well, what the hell is Operation Gladio? And why don't I know about it? This seems like pretty big. It's all over Europe. I was stationed in Europe. Why do I not know this? Not only was I stationed in Europe, I got to Europe on the 2nd of August, 1990. And Paul Williams' book says that Operation Gladio was revealed to the world on August 2nd, 1990. So immediately I was drawn in, because this is now personal for me.
Right.
I'm like, I lived in Italy for 3 years and never heard the word Operation Gladio. They called it Years of Lead as well. I did hear that term, but another name for it is called strategy of tension. And you have to understand that principle before you can understand anything about Operation Gladio. So these manipulators, the international syndicate that controls everything, they decided that World War I was going to be used to set up some prototypes, the League of Nations and the Bank of International Settlements, because those two things were pivotal for World War II. Then we have World War II, and it creates the follow-on to the League of Nations, which is the UN. and the follow-on to the Bank of International Settlements, which is the World Bank and the IMF. Because as long as I can control money, I can control everybody.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They also set up NATO. NATO is not anything that you think it is. NATO is not.
We know it's the biggest terrorist organization on the planet. And Noam Chomsky's been saying from this thing needed to be gone in the 90s. It should have been gone. And its entire use since then has been
gone.
Terrorized.
Yeah. Well before the 1990s.
Yeah.
So did you know that the stay behind unit concept, now it goes back to the Boer Wars, but we probably don't have enough time for that today. And I'm happy to come back and talk about that. But the actual concept in World War II was created by General Reinhard Gehlen. And General Reinhard Gehlen came up with a concept, and he referred to them as werewolf units, citizen by day and killer by night. And he used them as he went east. He used them in all of the Eastern Front, to include Ukraine, where they still exist today. And Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, everywhere. So as he pushed this way, his trainer was Otto Skorzeny. Otto Skorzeny is going behind Reinhard Gehlen, and they're setting up all of these stay behind units. So as the Soviet Union begins to push back on Germany, these stay behind units are supposed to spring up behind them and take on the Russian front from behind. That was, in theory, what they were supposed to do. The Russians were way too advanced for that and basically annihilated them all. And so, but Reinhard Gehlen had them all over Europe. So before the World War II is even over, he picks up the phone and he calls Alan Dulles, who is in Switzerland as part of Wild Bill Donovan's OSS. And he goes, hey, I'll make you a deal. I have all of these weapon caches, because a stay behind unit is about 10 to 15 to 20 people, depending on where it's at. And it has these large caches of weapons buried. They have explosives, they have guns, they have money, they have comm equipment, and a couple of other things. And so he said, I have a map of where all of them are. I will give you that in exchange for you keeping me out of Nuremberg. And oh, by the way, my buddy Otto Skorzeny and several other people have to be part of this new unit. And this is how we're going to seed terrorism in the future. So they dress up Reinhard Gehlen in a 4-star army uniform, fly him to Washington, D.C. and debrief him for several weeks. Now, Alan Dulles and Wild Bill Donovan and the whole, eventually Truman's administration has this. And they decide that not only are they going to save Reinhard Gehlen, we're going to create the German BND, which is the equivalent of the CIA, and we're going to put Reinhard Gehlen in charge of it. So the Nazi general starts Western Germany's denazified intelligence apparatus.
Doesn't seem like a great way to get rid of the Nazi influence over there. And that's not even to bring up Operation Paperclip and, all the scientists we brought over here. So, yeah.
And not just here. Mm-hmm. Operation Paperclip put scientists in Japan, Egypt, South America, everywhere.
Yep.
All over the world they were. And they were all working for this apparatus. Now, if you're going to continue this and expand it into the newly created, so part of World War II's aftermath was creating a new map. And that's where the strategy of tension comes in and Israel comes in.
Right.
We are going to create hotspots, points of tension everywhere. And in each area, they dropped, like, for example, in Asia, they dropped Taiwan. Taiwan before World War II was Formosa. It was a Chinese island, along with 8 other ones, by the way, no one ever talks about. There's actually 9 islands that make up Taiwan, all of which were Chinese. And Chiang Kai-shek has an OSS officer as his military liaison, Colonel Paul Helliwell. And Colonel Paul Helliwell, who we know all ends up in the CIA, as do all of them do, he's shadowing Chiang Kai-shek, who is the warlord opposing Mao. And Mao is the one trying to get opium out of China, that the British, it always goes back to the British was using Indian opium, and shipping it to China to basically get inroads into China because they wanted to take it over. And the Boxer Wars were fought, which they ended up with Hong Kong and Shanghai as settlements for having won those wars. So they're already in China, but they want Chiang Kai-shek, who is the drug kingpin as far as heroin goes, in poppy fields in China. So Paul Helliwell calls Alan Dulles and he goes, hey, you know all of those GLADIO units we're going to set up, those stay behind units? We're going to need a way to pay for them. How about if we take the Chiang Kai-shek model and we start selling and capture the entire opium flow around the world? And now we've got black money for black ops. And Alan Dulles goes, that's shit hot. Let's do that. So the entire China lobby is created with Chiang Kai-shek behind it. You have them creating the World Anti-Communist League. Well, who would ever look at that? That would be a good thing, right? We're all anti-communist. The World Anti-Communist League had nothing to do with communism. It had everything to do with hiding a drug operation that was going to be used for Operation GLADIO to cover the expenses of a terror network that they were setting up. So Reverend Moon from South Korea, and we've got to get him out of jail because he's a criminal. He was in jail in the northern sector after World War II for pedophilia. So we've got to get him out of jail. So we have to invade Korea, the northern sector. And we made up an entire war to insert Chiang Kai-shek back into China. That's what the whole Korean War was fought about. And most people don't even know that. The same thing with the Vietnam War. Do you know who was put in charge after World War II of the northern sector of Vietnam originally? After Ho Chi Minh had been on our side fighting with us, they tried to stick Chiang Kai-shek in there. And Ho Chi Minh made Swiss cheese of him. So he ends up having to go to Burma. They moved most of their operation in the KMT army to Burma. Then Burmese government gets totally pissed off about that and kicks him out. And so the CIA had nowhere else to put him. So they install him in Formosa, changed the name to Taiwan. They called the KMT army the KMT political party. And they set up a thing called the Taiwanese Political Warfare Cadre. Political warfare cadre. And Chiang Kai-shek's big contribution to this whole mess was he said that if you want to overtake a country, what you do is you create death squads or assassins, terrorists, and then you make them into a declared political party so that if anybody attacks the political party, you can use a propaganda campaign that you're attacking democracy. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah. That's the game plan. That's it.
Yes.
Every
that
time.
was Chiang Kai-shek's contribution.
Yeah.
So he set up the political warfare cadre. Now, if you fast forward to Operation GLADIO's cousin in Latin America, it was called Operation Condor. All of those death squad assassins went to the School of Americas in the Panama Canal Zone, set up by the CIA and the United States Army. That was your level 1 training, to be an assassin, a kidnapper, and a torturer. The level 2 training was the political cadre in Taiwan. And literally, as crazy as it sounds, the death squad leaders all were educated in Taiwan. Most people don't even know this existed. Wow. Then level 3, if you got to be a drug cartel leader, like in Colombia, you got an all expense paid 1-year vacation training in Israel with the IDF.
Of course.
Now, if you go to most of the big countries in Latin America that you know are part and parcel, part of the drug cartel network that the CIA set up, you will find that almost every one of them had an Israeli advisor. Like Colombia had a guy by the name of Eitan, and he was the one that picked the people that were going to go to the 1-year advanced course over in Israel, because Israel, for most of Operation Gladio, from the very beginning to the current status, has been an arms trafficker for the CIA. So if the CIA needed arms for like the Contras, do you know who made the deal with Iran? Israel. Do you know who made the deal to ship weapons into Angola when Congress said no? Israel.
Yeah.
And we do it. The United States government does it by increasing the aid to Israel. Israel orchestrates the deal. And in the case of Angola, during the Reagan administration, they were buying the weapons, shipping them into South Africa and then into Angola. So every single one of these operations, you begin to realize, is all of the intel agencies were set up to collaborate with each other. And they were all set up post-World War II, except for the granddaddy MI6, who basically is in charge of the entire network. And they're the ones that always gets left out. But
no one talks about them. Because England is thought of, as one of America's best allies, just like Israel. So nobody wants to question whether, the UK has their hand in any of these issues we have going on today. And I'm so glad, you brought that up, because even though Zionism is a very important tool of, their goals and what they're using, I don't think it's like the top level, and I don't think the Zionists are the ones who are really calling the shots. I'm sure there are a few at the table, but I don't think it's only the Zionists. And by putting all the focus on them, they're able to leave people like the MI6 out of the conversation. And another secret society I wanted to speak with you about that I've actually been reading more about, called the Knights Templar, which seems to have their hands in a few different things and have been underground for a long time. People don't talk about them because they're so focused on only the Zionists. And Zionism is a huge problem because it's one of their most useful tools right now. So I do think we need to address it. I just don't think people should be overly focused on only that.
Well, can I add in about the Zionism? I think it's a matter of it's a state of mind that I think that we see Christian Zionists, we see also, so it's a state of mind that can be taken on, and I think that's why we kind of look at it. And I might be guilty of this. What you're saying, Jay, is that we're saying that there's a large global problem of this state of mind of total dominance and playing the victim, and then being completely free from any criticism, and then have just there's a whole game plan on it. And I think, and Colonel Towner, you mentioned from the beginning, this idea of betting on both sides. I think that's also part of this mindset, that you understand that you capture the banks, you capture the churches, you capture the education system. So I think that we're looking at that. Oh, and not to mention the media and Hollywood, you capture all of it. And I think we're calling it Zionism, but it's larger than that. But maybe we're just talking semantics, but we're saying, like, what is the thing that's running the entire plan? How long have they been planning this? And how deep does it go? Those are the questions we all need answered.
They're all going to be Zionists because it's one of their big tools. Right. So I still think we need to address that problem. We just need to realize it's a little bigger than only that.
If you understand that we're in an information war, then words matter.
Right.
And when you understand that they use particular words, and we have fallen into the trap of using their words, that's why my entire education process has been, I don't use any of their words. As a matter of fact, I use neutral words to convey ideas, so we don't get trapped in the arguments that they want you to get trapped in. And Zionism is one of those arguments. And you can talk about, I wrote a whole paper on my Substack about the origins of Zionism. You can understand the entire thing because it's very important to understand it and what they did to create it. Because inside of that is some very important Operation Gladio lessons. And one of them was the Haagen-Dazs, this terrorist organization that was set up inside of the British again, Palestinian Authority before Israel even existed. They came up with a MAFI. I was trying to think of that word yesterday. There's a MAFI, MUFTI, that was set up in Egypt which, by the way, was a British controlled entity at the time too, when they were building the Suez Canal. So there's a Mafi there, which basically germinated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist tool for them, and a Mafi in Jerusalem, which generated a terrorist organization there too. So when you create this and you understand whose those strings are attached to, it all starts coming into view. Now, the Mafi that they set up in Jerusalem, do you know where he ended up at the end of World War II?
Where?
Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
He was basically a part and parcel of a bought and paid for agent to he and the leading I don't know how you actually say that, but the terrorist organization that Bibi Netanyahu's dad was a member of, the Haganah terrorist organization, and it's actually been labeled as one, so that's not even hyperbole. Those two, the Mafi was the Islamic cleric, supposedly, but he was actually picked by Britain. Nobody actually thought anything of him. They hated him there. They didn't vote for him. It was a British process. They voted for somebody completely different that the British eliminated. And so he's a fake like cleric. And the Haganah actually would dress up as each other and accuse each other of terrorism to scare the hell out of everybody. So that was actually GLADIO before GLADIO was even invented, right? And that, because GLADIO was not a new concept, it actually preceded what was new after World War II is they embedded it in the intelligence agencies because they were all given birth after World War II. Because if you go back and you look at what we did in the Philippines in the early 1900s and the fact that we stole Panama from Colombia and basically did a false flag there and installed our own person because we wanted to steal Panama and finish building the canal. We didn't actually even begin it. That was a French project that Sullivan and Cromwell was representing the French guys that went bankrupt. So most of the people that Donald Trump talks about dying there they were French slaves from French colonies in Africa. They weren't even French. They were blacks that they put on a slave ship and trekked over to the Panama Canal, and like 25,000 of them died. We only lost about 5,000, and most of ours weren't American. They were actually Caribbeans, from Cuba, which, by the way, we had taken over after the Spanish-American War too.
You know, funny story. There's a lot of Jamaicans that went over there too. You'll hear some Panamanians speak, and they have a Jamaican accent, which is really weird. So yeah,
a lot of Jamaicans. You're absolutely right, because there was a drought going on, and a lot of the banana plantations and sugar plantations that these people worked on were not producing, and they needed a job, and so they went to the Panama Canal and worked. And about 5,000 to 6,000 died over the last 60% of the canal that we built, but nothing compared to the Africans that lost their lives at the beginning of the building of the canal. So that kind of sets the stage. So it was interesting that you mentioned P2, the propaganda duo, because there was actually a propaganda uno in Italy prior to Mussolini. Mussolini got rid of the mafia and got rid of the Masonic lodges. It was something that he did not believe in. And he was a fascist. He basically had set up in Italy the government under him, and then the oligarchs. And this is really this fascist template is what they wanted to do everywhere. Franco in Spain had basically done the same thing. The guy in Portugal was the same way. And weirdly enough, Portugal after World War II was still a dictatorship, and so was Spain. Portugal was allowed in NATO, but Spain was not. And the reason why they were not is because they hid everything in Spain. So Otto Skorzeny, after World War II, he originally went to Paris. And why Paris? Because that's where they set NATO up. Most people do not realize that NATO was set up originally in Paris. And why did NATO have to move out of Paris? Well, because Operation Gladio tried to kill Charles de Gaulle, the French president, over 20 times.
Wow.
Because he wasn't playing along, and he wanted to free the countries in Africa when the rest of the European elite did not. So he was all for letting Algeria to have their independence, and they didn't like that. So they tried to kill him over 20 times. So finally, Charles de Gaulle says, get the hell out of my country. And he gives the NATO commander, who happens to be General Lyman Lemonsker, an ultimatum to get out of France. And he withdrew France out of NATO. They were out of NATO until like 2009. Most people don't know that either. Lyman Lemonsker is very interesting because he shows up repeatedly in Operation Gladio. He happens to be the general that got fired for writing Operation Northwood and presenting it to JFK.
Wow.
Now, Operation Northwood was a schematic on how to do Operation Gladio in the United States using Cuban exiles who were our Operation Gladio, by the way. Most people don't know that either. Wow. So the CIA trained all of the Cuban exiles to be assassins, terrorists, kidnappers, torturers, whatever. And they deployed them all over the world. They were in Angola. They were all over Latin America during Operation Condor. They were in Vietnam. They were in the Philippines. Again, most people don't know that. They were our Operation Gladio. And Lyman Lemonsker, in conjunction with Alan Dulles right before he was fired, said that we want Cuba back because Cuba is integral in this whole operation, because all of those drugs coming in from Chiang Kai-shek was going to Cuba. Mm-hmm. They went to Cuba via the French mafia in Marseille. That was the only number 4 heroin lab that could give the pure white heroin until it was replicated down in Sicily because we owned basically the Sicilian mafia because they were in bed with us in New York and in Miami. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted all of that down there. So we eventually eliminated the entire Corsican mafia in order to take the entire control of the trade. But Cuba was critical to this plan. And when Castro came to power, which, by the way, it was CIA in the mountains training Castro because they had gotten tired of Batista and Che Guevara. They were all trained by CIA. And they thought that they would be able to co-opt Castro into doing what they wanted and allowing the mafia back into Cuba. He said no, then he became a villain.
Yep.
He was never actually a communist.
And it's funny because a lot of people don't realize, but one of the reasons Jamaica is actually in the state it's in today is because the Jamaican prime minister back in the 1970s refused to condemn Castro. He didn't necessarily pick Cuba's side. He just wouldn't go along with everything they were trying to do. And then because he said that he was going to be neutral, all of a sudden, a lot of drugs and guns started flowing into Jamaica. And the person who tried to assassinate Bob Marley was in the gang that was being funded actually by the CIA. They're called a shower posse because they were known for showering the whole block with bullets just to get one target. That's who the CIA empowered in Jamaica.
And they sent a grad student down to Jamaica to do a quote unquote survey for his graduate program. And what that survey did was went block by block to find out who they could tap to be critical of the government and who was not going to be critical of the government. They do this all the time in all of these countries. They will send these people in and they call them surveys. That's where USAID comes in. They fund all of these jackboots on the ground to do all of the intel looking like they're students at universities, because a lot of the universities, especially the Northeast ones, all have CIA agents embedded in their curriculum. That's how the Michigan State University got the Phoenix program job, is because all of those people were actually CIA agents posing as professors that then deployed to Vietnam and took over the national police training in Vietnam.
Wow. This is wild. Colonel Towner, you're giving us a lot. We have a lot to process here. There's a lot, all of our diabolical actions all over the globe. You're he's very versed, and the specifics are all there. And I know you told us before the interview, you said you want to make sure people understood where they can get more of this. We have you for 10 minutes, so I want to talk about this because you mentioned, I guess it was the author, Paul Walker. I got
Paul
Paul
Williams.
Sorry, Paul L. Williams. This is the book. Now, can you tell us about your relationship with Paul? Because we found this Operation Gladio. It's on Amazon right now. So like I want to hear your relationship with him, and is this depiction in here basically it's everything you've been talking about and more. Why do you suppose Amazon's even allowing this on their platform? Is there a certain way it's being worded where it doesn't look like it's incriminating so much? And I want a follow-up question with you is, have you had any pushback? Have you had any censorship issues? Is there something pushing back on any of this right now? Or are they just letting these conversations happen and hope that it doesn't pick up steam?
So let me answer about Paul Williams first. So when I read the book, The Third Way, found out about the stay behind units, I obviously did what everybody else would do. And I did a search on Operation Gladio. And because I'm an avid reader, that's the first book that I got. Mm-hmm. I read Paul Williams' book. And again, as a 30-year military person, I can't even begin to explain the gut punch that I experienced. Because I realized my 30 years in the military was all a hologram. It was all a lie. Everything that I had been told my entire life was a lie. The history that I was taught at Air War College, at Air Command and Staff, at Squadron Officer School, all of it, we're in constant education mode, was a lie, every bit of it. And it was devastating to me. But I'm the type of person that was like, all right, what's next? Who else has written about this? Well, then I found Danielle Ganser's book, which was used as a reference in Paul Williams' book. He wrote his book, NATO's Secret Army, as a graduate PhD level kind of project. That book was crazy. And then there's another book that a guy by the name of Cottrell. So again, I just started reading. And Paul Williams, one of my assistant researchers, tracked him down. I called him. He lives up in Pennsylvania. And I said, I have to talk to you. I have found out so much. And one of the things that happened, so your censorship thing is dead on. Okay. So there was 5 of us that was over on Truth Social doing research about this. I had a book club over there. 3 of them left because they were Catholic, because Paul Williams, as a career Catholic high school teacher, professor, New York Times, Washington Post, he's been on Fox News. He's like a celebrity until he uncovered Operation Gladio. He was completely pushed aside, never talked to again, never invited to go do anything, right?
Wow.
Well, these 3 other researchers that was originally working with us said that he was an atheist. So I started digging into his background. I'm like, dude, he's a Catholic. He's not an atheist. What the hell's wrong with you? But what you find out is, as you pointed out earlier, this is not one religion. The Catholic Church, as we found out, participating in the human smuggling shit that's going on right now, in Vietnam, was intimately involved in the missionary work in North Vietnam and used the church to mass migrate involuntarily using psychological operations created by the CIA knowingly. 1 million Catholics down to South Vietnam who had spent 1,000 years in a village up there, in order to skew the elections in the South, in order to elect Diem, who was a Catholic.
Wow.
So you find out, and oh, by the way, there's a book called Thy Will Be Done that is exclusively about Nelson Rockefeller using the Protestant religion in schools like Moody Bible College and a college called Wycliffe Bible College out in either Arkansas or Oklahoma, that created the Summer Institute of Language, SIL, who deployed missionaries down in Latin America as part of Operation Condor that every time they found an oil field that had an indigenous Indian population living on it, they would send these missionaries in, unbeknownst to the college students doing it, to translate a Bible for them, and then massacred everybody in the village.
Wow.
Because they hid so well. So the censorship comes from this. Most people have never heard of Operation GLADIO, right? So as soon as I started doing the research and started speaking up about it, friends of mine like Brian Case, who has a very large audience, started reposting some of my stuff. And, you know, we have several thousand people that attend 4 o'clock every Monday. We do Monday through Friday book reviews on X and Spaces. And like you said, you found me from showing up in someone else's space. Mm-hmm. I will go anywhere to talk about this, and I will talk about it to anyone. But here's the problem. You have people like, and I'm not afraid to name names, by the way. I don't give a shit if they don't like me or not. I had people at the beginning, like Mike Benz, reach out to me. So I had my X space DMs turned off to outside people. So he had to friend me and follow me, or whatever it's called, in order to communicate with me.
Yeah.
So he sent me a DM and he asked me where I was getting all of my Operation GLADIO material. Well, I know how this whole thing works. I wasn't born yesterday. I'm like, I'm not giving you my shit. I'm not giving you all of my research. And I didn't even know him. I have since found out he steals all kinds of people's shit and pretends it's his. So I literally took a picture of Paul Williams' book and sent it to him.
There you go.
I said, I'd start here. I've got more if you want it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do your work for you.
Send them the Amazon link and say, hey, have fun.
Yeah. So what I found out is he talks about Paul Williams' book behind his paywall. And he began using Operation GLADIO material, never mentioned my name, never mentions Paul Williams' name so people can do their own homework outside of a paywall. And he basically pretends to know all of this stuff. But here's the problem. Mike Benz's grandfather is from Italy. Mike Benz's grandfather went to OSS school with James Angleton. He was in Operation GLADIO in Italy. So you don't want anybody knowing about it.
You know, one of the funniest things about controlled opposition is they always give you little nuggets of truth to catch your attention, but then they use those nuggets of truth that bring you in and then mix in their own lies and manipulate it, you know, in other ways. So that's interesting. I did not know that about Mike Benz. So yeah.
Hey, since we're here and we have you for a few more minutes, I want to bring in our other co-host right now who wanted to get in on the tail end of this conversation. Craig Pasa, Jardula, welcome back to the show.
How you doing? How you doing, Jay Scott? How you doing, Colonel Watkins?
Hi.
What's up, Craig?
Listen, I wasn't supposed to come in for a couple more minutes. I was on the sidelines, but I had to jump in because I think it's really important. Because there's a lot of people who have got under me for bagging on Mike Benz or on Ian Carroll and whatnot, but I think this is really important. Because we understand that the media mechanism right now exists through social media. And a lot of these people who have this crazy following out of nowhere, right, they'll attract a lot of other people. I mean, I would always compare the nefariousness of controlled management narrative online to elections. Because when a citizen loses an election and the other side wins and it's a fake election, that citizen will then still kind of capitulate. Well, that's what the masses wanted. That's what we have to go along with when it was, in fact, fake. There's that same type of kind of nefariousness when it comes online. For me, Mike Benz, the way I caught him was when he was talking about the elections in Brazil. And he was talking about stuff that was completely false. He was talking about the censorship on Brazilian Twitter by, I think his name is De Moraes, the judge over there, who, granted, has way too much power. And there are a lot of issues with Lula's cabinet itself and the lefties in Brazil. That doesn't make the point that Mike Benz was talking that they were getting censored, a group of citizens, for looking into mail-in ballots and early voting in Brazil and whatnot. The only problem is there's no ballots in Brazil and there's no early voting. So my antennas went up. And sure enough, Mike Benz, he does that thing you talked about, Jay, and this is something that Steve Bannon did for so long, especially during the COVID evidence era. They talk truths. They gain your confidence. Oh, I feel that way too, so therefore I go along. But in actuality, they're to lead you astray. And Mike Benz, like Ian Carroll, have been those guys who've capitulated and kind of talked a lot of truths and a lot of stuff that a lot of people were able to kind of wrap their heads around with and side with. But then he's trying to lead you to this kind of mentality that Donald Trump is an outsider, right? So he's trying to take you somewhere. The great Ian Davis, who is a great guy to talk to, an anarchist, he says, don't pay attention so much to what they've told you. Pay close attention to where you're taking you. And unfortunately, Mike Benz has been one of those guys. So I'm very glad that you pointed it out, Colonel Watkins, because on social media, it's much more impactful than what we're seeing on the TV nowadays, especially when it comes to getting our news.
So my big thing in all of this has been teaching other people how to do the research and giving them the sources. Well, if you don't actually call it what it is, and he's never used the term Operation Gladio, even though that is a generally accepted term for the over 90 successful coups around the world, he calls it the blob. It's not a blob. That's it. And in an information war, it actually matters. Words matter. You can't use a term like blob. That's like Jello hanging on the wall, right? That there's nothing there. If you refer to it as an international, which it is, and a syndicate, which it is because it's criminal, it is an effort to force one world government through fascist internationalism. And when you are using specific words, you draw a picture for people. When you use a term like blob, there is no picture. It's just a big nefarious thing that they can never get their hands around. And how do you go research a blob? You don't. He wants to be a gatekeeper.
That's exactly the right word. Gatekeeper.
Yeah, and that's what so to me, I would say that I pay attention to what they don't tell you as opposed to what they do tell you, because what they are not telling you is would give you the ability to go do your own homework and form your own opinions. And I tell everybody, don't believe a word I say. Go look up everything that I just said.
Yeah,
because
and
I have source documents for it all.
And one of the, things I just was watching on your channel earlier today was your interview with a gentleman talking about the Skull and Bones secret society. And yeah, exactly. And, the secret societies are another aspect of this that, never get mentioned, like I had mentioned before, P2, the unit over in Italy, it was actually ran by Freemasons who were leading this counterinsurgent unit, like over there. You have the Knights Templars, which actually set up in Switzerland, and they happen to be the home of a lot of the NGOs right now. And if you look at, where the Freemasons came from, it does seem to have roots, like with the Knights Templars. So,
the Knights of Malta.
Yes, the Knights of Malta.
Every one of the who's who of the CIA was inducted into the Knights Malta. And your P2 chief, Gelli, Gelli, he's an atheist. They made him a Knights of Malta. That's not even allowed.
And it's a Catholic order. Knights of Malta is officially a Catholic order. And, another book I'd recommend.
They put an atheist in there because he was helping run Operation Gladio.
And another book I'd recommend people check out is a book called Warriors and Bankers, and it goes into the history of the Knights Templar and what happened after they got outlawed in 1309, I believe. So it's a pretty interesting history there. But this is a great conversation. I do have to run, you guys, because I got to get to work right now. But thank you for coming on, Colonel Towner-Watkins. I will be in touch soon. All right. Catch you guys soon. All right. Later, Pastor. Later, Matt.
Thanks,
bye.
Jay. Thank you. Colonel Towner-Watkins, you've been giving us some great information today. A lot of stuff to go down these rabbit holes together. And I'll throw this book up again because this is where people can start their investigation. And I love that that's the starting point, is do your own research. I mean, we've heard that more than ever these last few years, but it's so important in this day and age that we continue to do our own research. We don't idolize any one person. We don't bow down to any one thing. You get out of one tribe, you don't go to another tribe. you got to stay out and keep your critical thinking goggles on. So I appreciate being surrounded by people like you and Craig coming in with that just great insight there. And we have to stay true to our convictions. So you recommend people start with this book. And then I know you mentioned a few other ones. I mean, we've been talking about we have a very long reading list, let's say, but I want people to also be able to listen to you in spaces as well. So give us whatever else people can start this journey with you.
So I would also recommend, after you've read his book, I did 2 interviews with him a couple of weeks ago, one on a Friday and then the following Friday. They're on my Rumble channel. The Rumble channel is called The Colonel's Corner. There's over 100 videos there. I do book reviews. I went through all of Whitney Webb's One Nation Under Blackmail, because basically she's describing GLADIO without using the words as well. Almost that entire book is Operation GLADIO. And let me just leave one thought in everybody's mind, because I'm a visual person. One of the things that I realized is GLADIO is an old wagon wheel that has 3 spokes. It involves weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. The concept is the drug trafficking pays for the covert black operations. They sell weapons, which you have to go to war in order to generate weapons traffic for you to skim off of.
Right.
The war generates protection force for the drug operations. Afghanistan, Vietnam, Laos, all of the wars that we fought down in Latin America of covert nature generates weapon cells. So these two go together. Once you go into a country and you bomb the hell out of it, you generate refugees for human trafficking. Those spokes only are allowed to be able to work is if you have grease on the axle. And that's the blackmail aspect of it. All of the Jeffrey Epsteins and Mark Dutroux and all of the pedophilia things are the blackmail grease that makes this entire wagon wheel continue to turn. And that, to me, is Operation GLADIO in a nutshell. The paramilitary force that is controlled out of NATO protects this entire wheel to keep it rolling.
Wow.
Wow.
Just wow.
So, one final question for you, Colonel. I just want to ask about U.S. aid and, this dismembering of U.S. aid. What does that do as far as Operation GLADIO? Something, nothing, or does it make
what
it
you
worse?
find out with Operation GLADIO, funding and using. So here's another kind of mind-blowing concept. Ronald Reagan was not a good president, which blew my mind. Because if you go back and look, he's the one that set up National Endowment for Democracy, which created
1983. Yeah.
He's created a slush fund for the Republicans, the Democrats, unions, and big business under the chamber. Okay. Those slush funds were basically CIA fronts. IRI was ran by John McCain for 25 years. So at the same time, he's sitting on the Foreign Affairs Committee for 25 years. He's running covert operations on behalf of the CIA, overthrowing governments.
Sure.
Okay. So the guy that's supposed to be in charge of oversight, Lindsey Graham was on there. Mitt Romney was on there. Joni Ernst is on there, blah, blah, blah. Yep. So they use the NGOs as fronts. And the reason why they did that is because they realized Carter, when he did the Halloween massacre and basically fired almost 1,000 covert operators in the CIA overnight, that they were at risk if they only left that apparatus inside the government. So they set up what was referred to then as the Enterprise with a bunch of the fired guys. And they set up basically a shadow CIA outside of that. Well, if you're going to have that, you're going to have to have NGOs and other apparatuses that you can infiltrate in order to be able to deploy all of your intelligence resources under protective cover. You will find them in PepsiCo. You're going to find them in AT&T. You're going to find them in every major corporation. They are literally everywhere, in every university that's of any note. There are CIA intelligence assets everywhere. They're in the FBI, they're in IRS, they're everywhere. And they're in the DEA. Every place that's critical to discovering their operations, they have operatives. USAID, and I know many people know this, but that Barack Obama's mother worked for USAID in Indonesia. She was in the CIA suite inside of the Indonesian embassy. The man she married, Sotero, was a colonel in the Indonesian army that worked for the CIA to overthrow Sukarno and install Suharto. So they are everywhere doing all kinds of shit in our name, and just about everybody. So I did a show last night at 9:30 on the Alpha Warrior channel. We do a show every Wednesday night. He has a playlist on his Rumble channel that's Operation Gladio. We're like at 42 shows now. It literally goes through everything. We did Jim Jones. That whole thing about drinking Kool-Aid was a lie. Whole O.J. Simpson was a lie. Everything that you think you know about your world, I can basically go through and discredit just about anything we've ever been told by our government based on the research that we've been able to do.
Yeah.
Wow.
I do have a true or false question to get you out of here because I can keep you here all day. But we're gonna dive right into the NED and the USAID. And I go to Latin America a lot and I observe elections. So I have some time recently in my life in Latin America and talking to a lot of people and seeing those NGOs all in there, in different countries. The OAS is the one, or the OAN, it's the same thing. The organization of, I think it's organization of whatever states, or
OAS.
The OAS, which it's this, I think in Latin America they use
Organization of
OAN.
American States.
What's that?
Organization of American States.
I deal mostly with them because they're involved with elections. They're the CIA.
They were a component of the World Anti-Communist League.
Yeah. I mean, all these NGOs, and I say this because I often say, and it's just a true or false question to get you out of here, because I often say the NED and USAID are the PR firm for the CIA and their regime change wars.
They're the front money.
Yes, they're also a money laundering scheme, but they're the ones who kind of present. And if you listen to Marco Rubio, he was like, "Oh, they wanted to be their own independent NGO. They're not listening enough to the foreign policy apparatus, what I call the regime change industrial complex." Will the ending of the USAID and the NED change the behavior of the United States moving forward when it comes to regime change?
Only if you take out the drug piece of it too, because the two pieces of funding is the NGOs and the covert black market money. So they both walk hand in hand. You have, and the classification of cartels as a terrorist organization gives Trump the ability to use what Eisenhower set up in the 4512 National Security Action Memorandum. It was amended by Bush to include terrorists so that you can assassinate a terrorist anywhere. It used to just be a communist. You had to be labeled a communist, which is why Allende in Chile and the Sandinistas, they were all labeled communists, and Lumumba in Congo, because that was the only justification for assassinating someone. You had to call them a communist first. Now, in 1991, when the Soviet Union fell, we added terrorists. So now you've got two hammers. You got a communist hammer and you got a terrorist hammer. So as long as you can label them one of those two things, you're cleared to assassinate them. And you can like that or not, but that's the rules of the game. So yes, but I think it's important to clarify one thing, because most people who've never worked in the government doesn't understand. Rubio, a lot of people were saying initially that when they closed down USAID, basically, that they moved it into the State Department. They did not. Rubio came out with a statement and said he's dual-hatted, and this is important for one reason. He's dual-hatted temporarily as the director of USAID and the Secretary of State. They have no intentions of burying that shit in the State Department. They are closing it down, and that is very different than folding it into the State Department.
Yeah. Well, These are the important conversations that not everyone's having, especially the people that are on the Trump camp and they think that we're getting something done and they're celebrating right now. But we have to stay skeptical and stay non-tribal and stay courageous with all the work we're doing and do our own research. Colonel Towner-Watkins, thank you so much for your time today and exposing Operation GLADIO. We hope the people watching, they're able to do their own research and figure all this out, because there's so many different rabbit holes to go down here and all the different destructions and annihilations and horrible things we've done around the globe for so many centuries now, it seems. So we gotta have the people need to rise up and pay attention, and maybe we could do something to fight back. So thank you so much.